Hello and welcome to the Cheeseroom Podcast. This is Brendan, your host for the show. Joining me for a very special Brighton preview, part of our Legends season, as we raise money for the Favela Food Fund over Easter, our official charity. First up, we've got John in the South Coast. How you doing, John?
Hi, Bren. Very good, thanks. Sort of rushed home from work, quick haircut on the way, and I'm here to see an absolute legend, a guy that played in the first game I ever went to as well. So, happy days.
There we go. You look very trim. I like this. A very nice trim, John. Well done, mate. As John said, we are joined by legends. It's been a while since we've had him on. We're delighted to welcome back Spurs legend Gary Stevens. Gary, welcome back. How are you doing?
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Everything's good with me. I still find that word legend in front of my name uncomfortable, to be honest with you. I was privileged the other day to be on Steve Perriman's podcast, and now that is a legend when you played almost 900 games for Tottenham Hotspur. Yeah, I had a great 7 years there. I had a little bit of success, but I can't quite put myself in that category. If you want to, that's okay, but I'm not prepared to.
Well, that's the thing. You're right. It's a word that's kind of used quite loosely these days. Like you get around down the pub. Oh, what a legend! But Gary, you won the UEFA Cup with us. You've won trophies with Tottenham. You've been with the club for so long, and so for me, certainly legend. John? What about you? Gary, legend or not?
Well, he was on Wackaday in the 80s as well. That's where I remember him from as much as anything. No, you are absolutely, Gary. Winning the UEFA Cup. You scored a winner in North London Derby, didn't you? Absolutely top man for me. You played for England in the World Cup as well. What more do you need?
Sure. Yeah, well, yeah, I had a good run at it. I had a good career, and it could have lasted a little bit longer. That would have been handy. But, I guess I achieved just about everything that, as a schoolboy, dreaming of becoming a pro footballer, I just about got there.
We're delighted to have you back, Gary. And it's perfect timing as well, because we do have two of your former clubs playing on the weekend. We got Spurs versus Brighton. Gary, as a follower of both Spurs and Brighton, last weekend's results, you must have been very happy with those. Were you covering them for media at all? Did you watch the games?
Well, I do a certain amount of media work. Yes, I do. But last weekend I wasn't working. Across the weekend, I actually watched 5 of the 10 Premier League games in effect live. And yes, of course, I watched Brighton win at Arsenal. And yes, of course, I watched Spurs win up at Villa Park as well. I follow the football very, very closely. When you consider where Brighton were as far as their form leading up to that game, and then, of course, could Spurs keep it going and make it 4 on the spin? In actual fact, I mentioned Stevie Perriman's podcast a little while ago. When he asked me to come on it, and it was kind of in lieu of this, Spurs-Brighton game as well, I sent him a message and said, well, look, the fixtures are this, and we'll have a great show because Brighton will win at Arsenal and Spurs will win up at Villa Park. And, of course, they dropped in. My predictions aren't normally that good, I've got to be honest.
Mystic Meg, hard at work. It was a great weekend, John. We've covered the Villa result already. The fallout from that, obviously, is sadly the injury to Gary Doherty. We know now that he is out for the season, having injured his MCL, I think it was. So it could have been worse. MCL, I think, is 12 weeks, so it's not as serious as other knee injuries. But Villa did take it far too far in that game.
It was a bit of a throwback to Gary's day, wasn't it? With those challenges flying in, and you've got to sort of take it in this day and age. There was 2 or 3 red cards there, and for some reason in last week's YouTube, I actually put the referee in the run sheet. Never do that, but obviously I had a bit of a premonition that he would be terrible. And VAR these days don't seem to be going against anything the referees do unless it's a blatant handball or something they miss. But yeah, some of those challenges were just shocking. It was very Steven Gerrard-esque. If he'd booked Cash or even sent him off, the others wouldn't have happened. So actually, I feel he had a lack of care of duty for the players' safety because they won the ball, but they were flying through. And in any other game, those are fouls at the very least, let alone bookings or red cards.
Gary, your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I think Villa decided to get stuck into Spurs a little bit, and they did. the challenge by Cash, for example, the challenge by Mings being another one. Back in my day, you've played the ball, and of course your momentum has taken you through the opponent, and that was acceptable at the time. These days, and I think it's right, if you go in excessively, if you go in without due care and attention, whether you play the ball or not, it's deemed a foul. And players' careers hang by a thread. There was an infamous challenge when Spurs were at home against Wimbledon when I was playing, which involved John Fashanu and myself and Vinnie Jones. And the truth is that Vinnie Jones did just make contact with the ball before he made contact with me. And that tackle in today's game, I think it would have been a red card. Back then, the linesman was stood there, gave nothing. The referee wasn't far away, gave nothing. And I got stretchered off and I was out of the game for 8 months. So I think the amendment and the reassessment of the laws of the game are appropriate today.
If I could just jump in there, Bryn. So at this point, Gary, I have to admit, that was the first Spurs game I ever went to. It was my 12th birthday. Not a good day for you, unfortunately.
No, it wasn't. Do you know what?
Go on.
I was going to say that was also the first time that, my only daughter at the time, but I had two in the end. My eldest daughter came to see me play as well, which was quite ironic. Yeah.
Oh.
Not a good day. Never mind. Move on. It's okay.
Move on. You've got
in the
through
past.
It is. You've got through it, Gary, and that's the important thing. So, speaking of ailments, I guess, Gary, the big news this week is that Antonio Conte has tested positive for COVID. He tested positive on Saturday. He's without symptoms, so they're saying that he should be on the bench on Saturday. Quite how they know that, I don't know. I don't know how long the when it started and till when he gets the negative test. But it's not good news, is it? The disruption to the preparation for the Brighton game.
Yeah. Well, like yourself, I'm not up to date, particularly on the rules and the regulations of COVID and how long and why you should, etc., etc. But I think Antonio Conte is just key to Spurs Football Club at the moment. If the gaffer isn't in at training, and I read today that apparently he has been in at training but has been keeping his distance, socially distancing. But he wants to be involved. He wants to be right in the heart of it. So, yeah, I think it could be a slight disruption, but you'd like to think that the team of coaches he's got round him can generally cover that. But it's never quite the same. Whenever I look back to my playing days, for example, if Keith Birkinshaw wasn't there, for example, on a training day, it just felt down a notch. And that could well be the case at Spurs at the moment.
John, I think the one of the key things that we've had, as we've not been having midweek games, is exactly that, the time on the training pitch, but also the video time. Video sort of analysis is a key part of Conte's ways of doing things. So with that in mind, I think, is that perhaps a good thing, that maybe because he can still plan those video sessions, have one of his staff dictate what he wanted to say in those. So fingers crossed it may not be as disruptive as it could be.
I guess worst case scenario, he could sit in that office that Mourinho made famous on the Amazon Prime documentary and have a webcam like this, couldn't he? And be on the massive screen they've got in their cinema room and be talking about it. Or I imagine he doesn't do all the talking. He's got other coaches who can do some of the analysis and explain it to players. And as Gary said, he'll be out on the training pitch because you can socially distance. It's outside. There are basically no rules now. It's only Premier League rules, I believe, that might be possibly preventing him from being in the dugout or the change room. But legally now, if you haven't got symptoms, and you can go out anywhere you want. So in the UK, and as we've seen in recent days, there's been far higher people getting in trouble for things in the past. Now anything goes pretty much. So I expect him to be in. I did say the dugout, and that confused me because we don't have dugouts anymore. In Gary's day, you'd whack your head on that little roof, wouldn't you, Gary, at White Hart Lane? But it's all nice. Nice seating now, isn't it? All heated seats and stuff. He'll be there. I think we'll be fine.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's look ahead to that game as we do with these previews. Again, it's been a while since we've done a preview. We will run the rule over the opponent. So as we discussed at the start, they beat the Gooners 2-1 at the Emirates on Saturday. Potter lined up that day, excuse me, 3-5-2 with McAllister and Welbeck up top, and he rested Mopai, which I thought was a bit of a surprise. They are 11th in the table, so they're kind of in that not making Europe, but not going down either. So you'd normally say, Gary, that perhaps they'd be on the beach, but we saw against the Gooners at the Emirates that they're certainly not.
No, they're not. And, I don't think for 1 minute that anybody at Brighton Football Club is glancing towards the summer holidays at all. Brighton want to finish in the top half of the table. They're 11th at the moment. Immediately above them, I think on the same number of points, is Crystal Palace. You know the rivalry that there is between Brighton and Crystal Palace. And then just above Palace is Leicester City. So, Brighton could finish 9th. And I think that's what they're striving for. And of course, there's 5 or 6, maybe thereabouts, clubs immediately below Brighton as well. So, a good, strong finish for Brighton. They're finishing the top half of the table. If they don't pick up points between now and the end of the season, they could end up, 15th, 16th in the table, which isn't where they want to be. So, no, I think Brighton will be certainly at it in this game.
Before I go and tell my son to go downstairs, John, what have you made of Graham Potter? I want to get Gary's opinion on Potter as well, but let's go to you first, John. He's kind of the hipster favourite, Graham Potter, and there was talk that he refused Spurs during the summer because he didn't want the clown car that is Tottenham Hotspur to ruin his reputation, which he may live to regret. He may become the next Eddie Howe. So are you impressed with Potter and his style?
I like Potter. I think he plays some good football. His biggest problem is his lack of a goal scorer. If he had the clinical front three that Tottenham have at the moment, I think there's no doubt Brighton would be further up the table. But what they've got is, I called him on the YouTube show before the game last month, the bit of a tinker man, because he is. He does like to change it. He plays different formations. He plays 4 at the back. He plays 4-2-3-1. Plays 4 with a diamond sometimes, or he plays 3 at the back. He likes to adapt to situation. Obviously, also the players he's got available. But he's got lots of these little players like Trossard and McAllister, who are very mobile, but they're very clever. They could almost be in the Spanish league, I imagine. But the biggest problem for them is the goal score. We saw Mopai miss that absolute sitter in the FA Cup game, didn't he? When he was 1-on-1. I'm not surprised he was dropped. Welbeck going back to Arsenal against his old team, if he's fit, which is a rarity, will be very motivated. And Mopai's only scored twice this calendar year. So you're probably due one on Saturday. I always like Mopai, but for some reason he's just gone off the boil, I think, at the moment. Gary, what do you think?
Well, Brighton have really struggled to score goals, haven't they? They've played 31 games in the league, and I think they've scored 28 goals. So they've not even averaged a goal a game this season. Mopai's their top scorer on 8. Thereafter, Trossard's got 5, McAllister's got 4, Welbeck's got 3. There is also a danger that comes from Brighton with their set plays as well. They've got some really decent players in the air. Webster, Duffy, Dunk, for example. So that would be potentially a threat, I think. But I think John summed it up nicely when he said about lots of little busy players. They're a good squad. I think the quality that Brighton have is the fact that they have a very good squad. Clearly they do a lot of work on the training park. You touched on it previously about the different formations. I know when Spurs won down at Brighton played with a back 4. I don't think they'll play with a back 4 this time, for example. I think they'll look more towards the formation that they used when they beat Arsenal last weekend, which was 3 at the back, 5 in midfield, 2 up top. And they can dominate possession, Brighton. They really can. They've got lots of good ball manipulators. But if they had somebody who could score them the best part of 20 goals in a season, it would be a very, very different proposition as far as I'm concerned.
Excuse me. And Gary, what have you made of Graham Potter, and how does he differ from your old teammate Chris Hughton in terms of playing style?
Well, again, I think Graham Potter's done a fantastic job. Joined the club from Swansea. He's been there almost 3 years now. took over from Chrissy Houghton, as you say, and Chris did a great job. He got Brighton into the top flight. That was 34 years after I was a Brighton player and we got relegated out of the top flight. So that's how long it can take to get back. Chris, I thought, did a fine job keeping them in the Premier League. Where's the difference? I think, and this isn't meant to sound disrespectful to Chrissy Houghton at all, because I fit the same character or the same category. Chris is a little bit old school, like myself. Graham Potter is new generation. Simple as that. And it's how you've been brought up. It's what your learnings and your teachings were in your early stages. I think that Tony Bloom, the owner of Brighton, made a really brave call to move Chris Houghton out and to appoint a coach who they'd done their homework on and they believed would be right. And I think Graham Potter's taken Brighton on to another level. No doubt about it. He's moved them on to another level.
And John, how do you see the game panning out? Like, do you agree with Gary that they'll probably go with the same formation that they did against the Goons? Because they packed that midfield. So they had Caicedo, Bissouma, and Mpebi. I must get his name. Mwepu, thank you. Mwepu, actually, I think he's a Gooner because he said during the week that he said to Arsenal fans not to worry, that they're not going to go light on us. So I was like, okay, Mwepu's getting in there. But do you see a similar approach, and who are you worried about? One player that stands out for me, and it may not just be because of his hair. He looks like Monica in Friends when they went to Hawaii and humidity. But is Cucurella. He looks a player, and he gets forward. He's one of the back three, but he does like to get forward. He's a player that I want to keep our eye on.
He is a good player, but I think Kulusevski will have the better of him over the whole game. I am worried about the midfield three. Whenever we play a team that plays three in the middle, it always worries me a little bit because we only have the two, apart from when Harry drops deep. So far, we've managed to cope with it generally. But yeah, that worries me a little bit. And those three guys with Bissouma in the midfield, very, very mobile, very strong. And that could be an area where they can overrun us a little bit. And as Gary said, they're very comfortable on the ball. But in some ways, we're actually quite good not having that much possession because our front three will just hit clinically on the back. And with the players going forward, I guess it's really how Emerson does in the right wing back with Doherty back, because we've lost that bit of drive now. And who plays left wing back? I'm guessing probably Reguilon, because Sessegnon obviously had a worse injury and Reguilon played the other day. But we've got to drive forward in those wing areas and really push Trossard and Gross back if they're going to play the wing back roles. But Spurs should win. But Brighton, it wouldn't surprise me if Brighton got something out of the game because they're a talented team and they can beat any team on their day. Same as Palace, Leicester. There's that group of teams in the middle there that Gary spoke about earlier. Any one of those teams can beat any Premier League team. So we've got to be on it 100%. But if we keep playing the way we have done, Spurs will win.
Well, we beat them not that long ago, Gary. We beat them 2-0 at the Amex. Again, I'm sure you probably did watch that game as it was your two former teams. Do you think that Brighton have improved since that result?
Well, first of all, yes, I did watch it. Couldn't not watch it in many ways. And obviously with living in Thailand, it does mean a few late nights. Thailand's 6 hours ahead of the UK at the moment, has been 7 earlier on in the year. So I quite often I go to bed about 8 o'clock in the evening local time and get up 2 hours later to watch a game. It's the only way I can get through it. I used to party all night, but I can't do it anymore. Do I think Brighton have improved since Spurs beat them 2-0? Well, as I recall, when Spurs beat them 2-0, that was the 6th consecutive game that Brighton had lost. So the answer is yes, they have improved as far as picking up points is concerned. And we all know what results do for confidence. And I'm sure, Brighton will be much more confident having picked up the 3 points at the Emirates last week. Because it does, it instills confidence in you. So yes, I think Brighton will be a different proposition. But people say to me, well, who do you want to win when Brighton and Spurs play? Well, the truth is, it's out of my hands. So therefore, I can sit aside of that, and it doesn't bother me. But if I look at the two teams, And if I look at Brighton at their best, and if I look at Spurs at their best, Spurs will win the game. I believe that. And, that doesn't necessarily please me from a former Brighton player's perspective. But I think that, Spurs are, look at the league positions to start with, 4th, 11th. That tells you something about the season, doesn't it? Look at the goals that Son and Kane and Kulusevski have scored, for example. And then you look at the lack of goals from Brighton as well. There is a big difference between the two sides. Having said that, on any given day, we know what it's like in the Premier League. The underdog can indeed beat the favourite.
Indeed. Well, before we get on to some of our Patreon questions for you, Gary, about your specific career, let's get some predictions in. John, how do you see this one panning out? Do you think we'll carry on our form, or do you think that the COVID and the Doherty injury, do you think that may have disrupted things?
I think Spurs will win 3-1.
Cool. Who's bagging the goals?
Oh, Sonny's going to get 2 and Kulu. I think Kane will create but not score again. He'll keep going on, and they'll just make a big thing about it in the papers, as they have been.
More importantly, who's getting their goal?
Bissouma.
Bissouma, yeah. He had a hit against. I might be thinking about the Arsenal game. I remember he does like to take a shot from distance. Not always on target, but he's a player. He's one that I think would fit in well at Spurs. Gary, how do you see the game going?
Well, to reiterate what I said a few moments ago, I'm going for Spurs to win it. The actual scoreline, I think, always becomes difficult. I always quite like to give at least one goal to the side that's going to get beaten, just in case they nick an early goal, because then your prediction's out of the window, isn't it? So, I think I'm tending to go 2-1, 3-1 Spurs as well.
Yeah. I think I seem to always say 3-1, so I'll go with that. It's a score that just fits, because whilst we have improved defensively, there's always a mistake in us at the back, be it from Hugo or from Davies or from Dyer or Romero committing himself too much. So I'll go with 3-1 and we keep the pressure on, and hopefully the Saints do us a favour against the Goons. One thing we need to mention, obviously, is that Ozzy Ardiles was recently discharged from hospital after a heart operation. I believe it was heart. Gary, I'm sure you were following it. He's your former teammate. What were your thoughts when you saw the good news that it was successful?
Well, obviously, the good news was great news. I was aware that there was a situation developing, and I think it was reasonably controlled, but it had to be done fairly quickly. And you know what the level of technology is like these days in the hospital world. It's quite brilliant the way medicine has moved on, but there's always a concern, and good news that Ozzy is back home. I am in touch with him from time to time on various methods, be it WhatsApp or social media. I haven't been in contact with him since. He needs to recuperate. He needs to be left alone, I think. And Steve Perriman mentioned that when I was talking to him the other day. And of course, Steve had a very, very near miss, didn't he, when he had a heart attack down at Exeter City Football Club. And another former Spurs and teammate of mine, Glenn Hoddle, had likewise. So it's, these are all super fit people from the past, and nobody's infallible anymore, are they? So, my exterior looks reasonably good for a 60-year-old, but the bit that I worry about is the engine under the bonnet. What is that like? So, regular medical checks, I recommend.
Yes, I do apologise. Many happy birthday, belated birthday for your 60th, which was a few weeks ago, wasn't it, Gary?
Well, not that long ago. I'm nowhere near 61 yet. It was on the 30th of March.
30th of March.
So it was the 30th of March. Yeah, but I had a good day. I celebrate it, but these days, it's all about self-preservation now, and every day I try to maintain what I've got, basically fitness-wise, not too much fat, etc., etc. So I had a good birthday without going mad. Thank you very much.
Well, of the three of us, you certainly look the fittest in this. And I did watch you on Steve Perryman's podcast, and Steve Perryman will be on the Cheese Room next week. We're delighted to welcome him to talk about his career, but also a Brentford preview, as we know he was player manager there. But you mentioned that last 8 years you've been taking care of your health and playing golf and going for walks, and good on you.
Yeah, it's got to be done. I recommend it to everybody.
Sticking with Ozzy, is there any anecdotes about Ozzy from his playing days that spring to mind?
Well, Ozzy was such a great footballer. I would suggest he probably had the quickest football brain of any player that I ever had the pleasure of playing alongside or against. And my first season at Spurs, although at the end of it we won the UEFA Cup, the league season was a disappointing season, and I had a difficult time. And I remember, I want to say it was away against Derby, and I've just gone ultra safe. So I'm at the back, and the ball's come to me, and I've bashed it away, and I've knocked it long, and I've cleared it into the stand. And after about 20 minutes, Ozzy with his little accent goes, Stebo. He said, pass to me. Stebo, no more long. Pass to me. And, this is a World Cup winner. So, Stebo decided to pass it to Ozzy a little bit more. Ozzy just hated it. The ball was flying over his head, flying past him. And, he just wanted it to his feet, and he didn't mind if he was marked.
Wow. And do you think that the arrival of Ozzy and Ricky Villa revolutionised not just Tottenham but the English game in it being more of a game played on the ground as opposed to long ball?
Well, I think it was kind of the real start of major world footballers coming into England. They weren't the very first, that's for sure. But Ozzy and Ricky had such an impact at Spurs. Ricky had actually left by the time I joined Spurs in '83, but I've met him subsequently when he's over to see Ozzy and what have you. Did it start to revolutionise the game? No, I don't think so, because there was so few, Ricky Villas and Ozzy Ardiles in the game at the time that the English game was still played like the English game. I think it's more along the lines of, since the Premier League came into being, and the Premier League with all the money has been able to attract so many top players and top European coaches as well. I think that's been the catalyst to the change in style generally.
All right, on to some of our Patreon questions. First one from Daniel Markham, one of our patrons. Gary, do you feel that, or how far do you think that we can go under Antonio Conte, especially looking to next season? I think this season, the best we can hope for is fourth, but are you optimistic for next season that we could challenge Liverpool and City, or are they still too far ahead?
Personally, I think Liverpool and City sit too far ahead of everybody. I still think it's a huge challenge next season for Spurs, assuming that they finish in the top four this season, to finish in the top four next season as well. I think without doubt Conte will stay. That's a must. I'm reasonably quietly confident with a good finish for Spurs and Champions League football next season. Harry Kane stays as well. Son signed a new contract. So, but I think the club does need to sign players. How far can they go? Next season, can they win a domestic trophy, as in a cup trophy? Can they finish in the top four? And I think that is a really successful season next season for Spurs, if that's what they can achieve.
Perfect. So a question from Davo in Australia, one of the podders and a patron as well. He asks, you've worked under Birkinshaw, Shreves and Pleat as manager. You may not want to say this, but which was your favourite?
Yeah. Well, I can stick in Terry Venables there at the end as well. And in the middle of it, there was a little conglomerate of Dougie Livermore, Ozzy Ardiles and Ray Clements. That was sort of after Peter Shreve had left and before David Pleat came in '86. They're all different. My first season at Tottenham under Keith Birkinshaw, I loved the fact that everybody knew exactly where they stood with Keith. He was pretty blunt and to the point at times. When Keith marched out of the clubhouse onto the training park for the start of training, you made sure you weren't behind him. You were in front of him, because if you were behind him and you were late, you were in trouble. And I was really disappointed actually when Keith left the club. It was the end of my first season. I'd signed for Keith, and that was one of the reasons I joined the club. So that's a little bit about Keith. Peter Shreve, I actually had my best spell, I think, under Peter Shreve when he was in charge. Shreves, he would, under Keith Birkinshaw, Peter Shreve was the player's mate to some extent, the hard gaffer, and Shreves, he was the kind of guy, but, always had great information, a little word in your ear, a pat on the back, would dig you out if he needed to as well. But I really enjoyed my time under Peter Shreve. David Pleat, interesting character, great knowledge. I personally didn't see eye to eye with him. Simple as that. I didn't see eye to eye with him. If I tell you, he was the only ever manager in my career that phoned me up on a Friday night to check if I was in. He didn't know me, because if he knew me, I wasn't out on a Friday night before a Saturday game. I wasn't out on a Thursday night before a Saturday game. I wanted to be successful so bad, and probably at times I should have gone out and had half a beer somewhere. It might have relaxed me a little bit. But no, I didn't see eye to eye with David Pleat. And of course, he didn't put me in the starting 11 for the '87 Cup final either, did he? He sat me on the bench. Taking nothing away from David Pleat, he had a great career, was a forward-thinking coach in many ways. And I loved it under Terry Venables, great tactician. But it was the end of my Spurs career, because Terry decided, having signed Steve Sedgley and shifted things around a little bit, that I wasn't for him, and he edged me out the door pretty quickly, to be honest with you. First of all, down on loan to Portsmouth, who I ultimately signed for. But again, maybe I should write a book about some of these, but I don't really want to. It's easier to talk it. But, I really knew when I wasn't part of Terry's plans, when it was a training session on the Wednesday and the first team were out, we're just starting to jog round, and Ray Clements was coaching there under Terry at the time. And Clem came up to me and said, "Steve-o," he said, "you're not training with the first team today." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I don't know. Terry's just said you're not training." I said, "What, am I with the Resis?" And Clem said, "No, Terry wants you to train with the youth team today." And he'd spoken to me before training, because he wanted me to go down on loan to Portsmouth. And he said, "Anyway, have a chat with me after training and see what you think." So after training, I came in and he said, "What do you think now?" It's the nature of the business. I'm not saying it's right, and I've still got great respect for Terry Venables, a great coach. When I did my UEFA Pro license, which I have, I had to, prior to doing it, I had to interview a coach that I'd played under, and ask what inspired him to go into coaching, and interview him basically. And Terry did it, and we were supposed to sit down for an hour, and 3 hours later we were still chatting. So anyway, a couple of little stories that your listeners and viewers might enjoy anyway.
Oh, absolutely. Golden. Love it, Gary. One quick final question. I know that the time's getting on. Is there a Tottenham player from your time or even afterwards that didn't make it at Tottenham, that you couldn't believe didn't make it, that you thought had the world ahead, and for some reason or another it didn't work out?
Gosh, tough question in some ways. I think Spurs over the years, like most clubs, have signed an awful lot of players, haven't they? And everyone's had great hopes for them. And unfortunately, there's a percentage that falls by the wayside. But when I first went to Spurs, there was a player who was a touch younger than me. I went there as a 21-year-old, so he was probably 20. Ian Crook, a midfield player. But unfortunately for Ian, he was behind the likes of Ozzy Ardiles and Glenn Hoddle, and of course there was Mickey Hazard as well. And so Ian barely played across his time at Spurs 40 games, but he went to Norwich and had a fantastic career at Norwich. I think he played over 400 league games for Norwich. I thought he was going to make it at Spurs, but he just didn't get the opportunities. So that would probably be my answer to your question. Ian Crook. Didn't he play in Australia as well for a while?
John, any ideas?
Don't know much about guys playing in Australia. He played a long time, though.
Yeah, I'm going to go for that. Ian actually ended up playing in Australia for a while, and he's been coaching in Australia as well. He might still be out there. I don't know. Anyway, well, Ian Crook.
We have many listeners in Australia, so one of them, please stick on the Facebook or Twitter.
I've just Googled it. He did indeed, and he's managed some teams out there. Sydney FC he managed. He played for Northern Spirit. He plays for Sanfrecce Hiroshima as well in 97-98. So he's been around the world.
I played in Japan. Yeah.
Yeah.
John,
so he did. Maybe he did make it, hey? but just not with Spurs.
Not with Spurs. That was the question. So you got it. You nailed it, John. Do you want anything to ask Gary? Sorry, I've been dominating.
A couple of things, Gary. The obviously 84-85, we finished third in the famous. We almost won the league, but and Neville Southall made the save, and then we struggled that second season under Shreves, didn't we? Before he got sacked at the end, just before the World Cup. What was the difference? What happened between those two seasons?
It's a great question. Some people would argue that Peter Shreve inherited Keith Birkenshaw's side, and that side was going to go on and do good things, and Peter just kept it going. Yes, we had a great chance of winning the league because I think we beat Everton in the opening game of the season away from home that year, about 4-1, and ultimately Everton won the league. And I think Everton maybe won it ahead of us by, 10 or 11 or 12 points in the end. We weren't even close. But in the latter stages of that season, I got injured. I did my left knee playing at home against Man United. And that was me out for the rest of the season and a chunk of the next season. Although the team went the following weekend and won at Anfield for the first time in God knows how many decades. But I think that the next season where we struggled, I didn't start the season, but is that blowing my trumpet too much? I don't know. It's been a bit flash, that, isn't it? I don't know, other than, maybe as good as we thought Peter Shreve was, maybe he wasn't quite that good. And we actually had a mid-season break away, which was to try and build a bit of team spirit. And we went to one of the Channel Islands to play a game out there. And us as lads, we got a little bit boisterous and we developed some adverse publicity as well, unfortunately, which again didn't help Peter in his position, because it appeared that, Peter Shreve maybe didn't have the control over us that he should have as the manager of Tottenham Football Club. So I think it's a combination of a lot of things, but ultimately it comes down to the players. We were the guys that had to deliver on the park, and we didn't.
Okay, and my other question is, you must have a Gaza story for us.
I've got loads of Gaza stories. I'm just not sure which one I could tell, and I'd certainly have to tame it down and edit it a little bit. Gaza was a great character, a great player. Tragic that he was so uncomfortable and troubled off the pitch. The minute he got onto the training park, he was a genius. The minute he got onto the match pitch, he was a genius. In his own life away from football, Bobby Robson described him, didn't he, as being daft as a brush. And Gaza was daft, but he had a heart of gold. After I'd packed up playing myself, I actually set up a scheme which was in insurance, which was to do with career-ending insurance for footballers. Because when I lost my career, I was grossly underinsured, big mistake. And I used to, go into clubs and speak to players about the situation, and heaven forbid, if it happens to you tomorrow, what sort of protections you have. And I went up to Middlesbrough on one occasion to do a presentation to the players there. And I got up to Darlington, got a taxi out to the training ground, met, Brian Robson was there and all the boys and everything. And afterwards, I'm about to call a taxi and Gazza says to me, he said, don't call a taxi. He said, I'll take you back to the station. And I said, well, it's not a problem because I know what Gazza can be like in a vehicle. Anyway, Gazza's given me a lift back. I'm telling you, I wished I'd got a taxi. I have never been so frightened in all my life, sat in the front seat of his big Range Rover. I'm just saying, Gazza, just look at the road, please. Slow down. Yeah, madman in many ways, but a lovely man.
Lovely man. And the documentary about him was out recently. I don't have UK TV, John. So, what is it? BT Sports. It's on.
I think it's out. I haven't seen it yet, but I have heard some good things about it. So I'm looking forward to watching it.
Yeah. We all love Gazza. And want the best for him. We've been running now for 40 minutes. So, is that all, John? Anything else for Gary?
No, that's great. Yeah.
Gary, thank you so much for joining us. We love you at the Cheese Room, and so thank you. This has been superb as ever.
Yeah, Brendan, thank you very much indeed. A real pleasure for me. Great to speak to you. Great to see you. And also, John, pleasure to meet and to chat with you as well. Keep up the good work, both of you. I regularly tune into your podcasts as well, and I know you mix it up from time to time. So good luck to the whole team.
Thank you, Gary.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Gary.
As I said at the beginning, this pod is to help raise awareness for our charity, the Favela Food Fund, helping families in need in the Morro do Coroa favela in Rio. So these we will be donating to thank Gary for coming on. And Gary, thank you for the social media support yesterday as well. Very much appreciating getting the word out. Listeners and viewers, we will publish on both YouTube and on the audio platforms. Even a couple of quid. I know times are tough for everyone. A couple of quid goes a long way out here in helping families just survive and get some well-needed foodstuffs. Do listen out for, first off, John, we got YouTube tomorrow night, I believe.
We have indeed. Yeah, YouTube's back. We'll be previewing the Brighton game again. And the usual things like birthdays. We mentioned Gary's the other week, actually. And we always do it on this day, pluck out a game from recent years and discuss it. And take, obviously, people's comments and discuss it and transfers and all those sort of things.
Brilliant. So do watch out for that and do listen out for the podcast from Franco and the crew, which will be out on the weekend. And as ever, come on, you Spurs.
Come on, you Spurs.
Come on, you Spurs.